You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present.
Hi, this is Gunter from Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host, and it is with great pleasure that I'm introducing Dr. Mark Williams, who's going to be my guest today on my 200th episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. Thank you. Mark is not just a friend, he's a collaborator, he's also a colleague. Most importantly, he's a neuroscientist and the author of The Connected Species, How the Evolution of the Human Brain Can Save the World. As you know, I've been on about attachment and connection all the way through my podcast. The book fundamentally explores how the human brain evolved to connect and cooperate with each other, with others. So again, it reinforces what I've been talking about. He combines history, psychology, human health to tell a fascinating story of humankind, one that's based on collaboration and not competition. He's also the founder of Rethinking the Brain, a website that shares insights and resources on neurosciences and well-being. And let me give you a stunning look at his book. So when you go and look for something to read, check this out. In my book, it's a must read. So Mark, tell me in your words, what is human connection and why is it so vital?
So what we need to remember is that we're not the strongest species and we're not the fastest species, and we actually don't have the largest brain of all the species that are out there. But how we became the alpha species on this planet Earth and took over basically every continent is because of the connection, because we actually connected with each other, and we actually enabled us to then thrive because of that connection. But having that connection meant that we really had to focus on creating those connections, creating those relationships between each other, and that requires a huge brain to do that, because it's really, really complicated, right? And we're the only species in the world that actually collaborates across groups. So you think of bees, right? Bees in a hive, they all collaborate with each other, and they have these amazing jobs, and they all do specialised jobs and everything else. But one beehive won't turn around to another beehive and say, hey, there's some flowers over there that we didn't pollinate, so you should go and pollinate. Or we got extra honey, and then you can give us some extra honey next. We do that. We do that across the world. We do it with all the different groups of these amazing species because of that connection. But that means that we have evolved this huge brain to enable us to do that, and that brain thrives on that connection because that's what it's evolved to do over millions of years, right? You can't change that in one generation. And so our brain, the best thing for our brains is actually to connect with other people and to actually have conversations with other people, because that's how we've evolved to actually do it. And so we need to be having more conversations with real people in real world, because we know just having someone you trust and sitting down with someone you trust is better for your mental health than anything else you can do, and better than any drug. I don't have to tell you this, right? Better than any drugs that are out there. And it's actually, there's now evidence that it can increase your lifespan by 10 to 15 years, just sitting down and chatting with someone. And it's so important in organisations, so important in schools. It's so important for all of us to realise how vital this connection is and how vital it is for all of us. And sadly, we're starting to lose some of that connection these days.
Yeah, so that also gives me a very sound rationale for why therapy works, especially in one-to-one proximity. On that note, just very quickly, do you reckon it's better than say, for example, therapy over like telehealth?
Yeah, 100%. So we don't get a lot of the neurotransmitters released when we're doing it over the internet, over telehealth, than we do when we're actually face to face. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them, of course, is just touch. When we greet each other, we always have some way of appropriately touching each other. So Stoic societies like ours will shake hands, and even the Inuits will actually rub noses because it's the only part of their body that's actually showing. And on our hairy skin, which is your nose and or most of your skin, we have C fibres, and those C fibres are only in us mammals. And it's there for touch, and that's why we enjoy touch. And those C fibres activate an area of our brain which release oxytocin, which is really, really important for creating that connection. It makes us more open and more willing to actually connect with the other person and to trust the other person. So you need that in therapy, right? And you're not getting that when you do that. And we also have the whole body language that's going on and reading each other's body language through the mirror neuron system, which releases serotonin, which again is really important for having that relationship. Also, a whole bunch of other really good neurotransmitters are released because we're mimicking each other's body language and we're understanding how each other is feeling and we're reacting to that automatically, and all of that stuff happens automatically. And then you have eye gaze as well. We can go on and on, but eye gaze is also really important, which you don't get. So you and I are facing each other. If I want to talk about something over there, I'll look over there. You know that I'm actually talking about something over there. Whereas you don't get that information online because you don't know what the person's looking at or where they're looking and all those sorts of things. So there's a huge difference between trying to connect online compared to face to face. So we need to be doing it face to face, absolutely.
So I'm very well aware that we're really tapping into this vast sort of body of knowledge and resources that you've got. But I've got to ask you, where was the germination for the book?
That's a good question. So, look, a lot of it's based on the research I've been doing for a long time, and I was approached when I first came back from MIT and started working back here in Australia. I was approached by an editor, and he asked me to write a book, which was a different type of book, and I mulled that over for a while. But it wasn't what I wanted to do, and this is something I've wanted to do for a long time, but it wasn't until about 18 months ago I was surfing. And I came up with Connected Species as the title. And when I came up with that, it became into my head as I was out the back waiting for a wave.
As you do.
As you do. And it just popped in my head and I just went, that's it. And everything else just fell out of it from there. It was quite an amazing experience, and I'll probably never have an experience like it again. But it did. I mean, I've written all these different chapters on different things and different books and all the rest of it. And I've got files and files and files of different stuff. But when that happened, it sort of all cemented a lot of those ideas into one book, and the chapters sort of fell out of it. So that was really where it came from.
So it's sort of a bit like a Fred Hoyle moment. He used to, if he got stuck on a problem, he used to just go out for a walk, lock up the study and go out into, I think it was the forest. And generally he reckons that by the time he got back, he usually made some progress.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting experience, that whole intuition, isn't it?
It is. I mean, obviously, we know that because our we know that our working memory is really limited. So what we're consciously aware of any minute isn't much at all, right? Because consciousness is basically working memory, and that's really limited. And so most of our thoughts and most of what goes on, and especially innovation and creativity, happens in our long-term memory, which we don't have access to, right? And so we've actually got to have those moments where we're doing nothing to allow that to come to our consciousness, so that we actually realise, hey, we've got these good thoughts in there. But all of us have got great thoughts in there somewhere. We've just got to access them by actually slowing down and doing nothing, right? Or doing something which is really repetitive, like going for a walk or sitting out on a surfboard or rowing or whatever it happens to be for you. But we've got to slow down and actually allow those moments.
Which is interesting, because our culture wants us to speed up. It wants us to be more productive, a higher performer. In other words, do more with less time. So that doesn't seem to go well then together.
No, and it is. It's a real problem these days because everyone's busy, and everyone feels as though they're busy all the time. But we're less productive than we ever have been. I mean, productivity for individuals has gone down. Organisations have got more productive because of the systems within the organisations, but actual productivity of individuals has gone down dramatically because we're all busy, and being busy isn't being productive. And so But slowing down and just focusing on one task at a moment actually is what we talk about as being productive, and we actually get shit done. Whereas we're not getting shit done because we're all busy. And the other problem is, again that working memory, which I talk about a lot in the book, but our working memory is so limited that we can only focus on one thing at a time. And our attention controls what's going into that working memory and allows us to actually concentrate on one thing. But if we're flipping from one thing to another, we can't multitask. Our brain's incapable of it. So what we're doing is we're task switching from one task to another, and then back to that one, and then back to that one. And each time we do that, we lose 90 seconds of our time. So you're losing 90 seconds of your time every time you go from one task to another, because of the fact that your working memory hasn't held that information long enough for it to be transferred to a temporary store, for it then to be transferred to your longer-term memory later on. So every time your phone dings, or every time you get a phone call, or every time your email pops up, or every time, each time you do that, you lose 90 seconds of your day. Which is a lot of time we're losing every day, right? And I think if people realised how much time they're actually losing every day, I mean, if you got that back, you get much more done. And then you could have moments where you could actually think. Which would be awesome, right? And moments where you can spend more time with your kids, and moments where you can spend more time with your family. And that's really important, and that's what I work with a lot of organisations around that idea.
So that's really interesting stuff. And then what's just come to my mind is, how then does this fit together with sort of our arousal process? Where are the key impacts in terms of just, you talked about overall well-being. One of the things that I deal a lot with people, who've got anxiety disorder, depression and so on, is that they're actually not good in managing their sort of arousal system per se. So how does this fit with what you're talking about in terms of human connection?
Yeah, that's a great point. So stress has got a bit of a bad name in recent times, and everyone's doesn't want to be stressed. Everyone wants to be busy all the time, but they don't want to be stressed, and that really doesn't happen, right? You're always, if you're busy, But I mean, stress at a certain level is really important, because if we didn't have any stress, there'd be no point in getting out of bed in the morning, right? Because you have an amount of stress which actually gets you out and makes you go and find food and find a mate and do all those things. So we need a certain amount of stress, but we don't need. If we go past a sort of optimal amount of stress, then we start deteriorating, and that's when we get into areas of clinical anxiety and depression and all these sorts of things, because you've gone too far with that stress. So there is that optimal spot, but that optimal spot, it's easy to keep yourself in that optimal spot when you're actually collaborating with other people, because of the fact that we get all these really positive neurotransmitters released into our brain, which keep us in a more positive state. And so therefore, by actually collaborating and doing stuff that we're doing, or talking to each other, actually makes your brain feel more comfortable in the state that it's in, and so therefore you're less likely to get anxious or go through depression, or feel overwhelmed and these things. So that's why the connection is really important for us to really focus more on. But real connection, and that's a real problem, because people feel busy, and so therefore they don't actually communicate with people properly. And so a lot of people today, and I work with a lot of leaders around this, is on how to actually communicate, because they are busy, and so therefore when they get someone into their office, or when they meet with someone, they have a whole bunch of stuff in their heads that they want to tell that person. And that's all they do. They tell that person what they need to tell that person so they can move on to the next person. And so, I talk to a lot of people about the fact that we've got to slow down, and we've got to actually find out where they're at first. But we've got to listen to them, because a lot of people, there's no gaps now when they're actually talking to someone. And we need gaps to actually tell the person, hey, I actually just listened to what you said, and I'm going to respond to what you said, not just respond automatically. Whereas, a lot of people, you listen to conversations, I always find it fascinating, listen to people having conversations, and one person will finish and the other person will start talking straight away, which means that person hasn't actually listened to what the person had to say. They've already had in their head, and they've been sitting there just waiting for a gap so they can actually tell that person what they want to tell them, rather than actually respond to what that person has actually said, which is really sad. None of us are listening to each other. We're all just telling each other.
Well, I guess get that problem, when I look at parenting and then especially adolescent responses to that parenting. I work with fathers and sons, not together necessarily, but, one of the things that I get a lot with dads is that they go into lecture mode.
Yeah.
So the first question is already task-oriented, not about how that kid's feeling or what's been going on for them. It's like, have you done your homework? And then the usual response is no. Like, let's be realistic. And so then the dad goes into this diatribe, this lecture about how that's really important, blah, blah, blah. But it's not actually engaging the teen in a conversation about what's necessarily needed here, which is usually, how about we just talk about how your day was, or let's just connect for a moment.
Yeah.
And then, if you're not doing your homework, you know what's going to happen at school, so how about I leave that to you? So it's the transference of accountability to the teenager rather than trying to, essentially dominate and control the kid, which never works really, really well.
We're asking the why questions, right?
Yeah.
Why haven't you managed to get your homework done? Why is this happening? Why?
Yeah.
And how can I help?
Yeah.
Or how can we enable you to do that better? Yeah, I was just thinking in my head, but when I was walking here, I was walking behind two ladies who were talking, and one of them was talking about the fact that their teenage kids are unreasonable.
Yeah.
And I hate the word unreasonable, because what is reasonable for you is going to be completely different for another person, and it all depends on your objectives, right? And it also isn't an objective measure. Being reasonable is completely subjective, and so your reasonable is going to be completely different to someone else's reasonable, and so therefore to them it's not unreasonable, it's probably completely reasonable, and you need to find out why what you want them to do and what they're actually doing is different, rather than just assuming that they have the same perception of what's actually happening as you do, because it's different and it's going to be different.
So let's broaden it out a little bit. We've covered some really interesting areas already, but I want to come back to the book. So as the author of the book, Mark, what do you think some of the key findings and insights that you've brought into the pages of the... What are they?
Yeah, so I think the fact that we're not nasty by nature, I think, is one of the really key things that we need to change in society. We went through the 70s and 80s. My daughter at the moment for school is reading Lord of the Flies, which is just... It's a great novel, but it's not something that we should be teaching kids, that this is human nature, right? Because it's not human nature, and it's not based on any sound evidence there. And again, we went through the 80s with the Wall Street, the Gecko, and Greed is Good, and all that stuff, and there's this perception that we by nature are actually evil, we're nasty, and then we're trying to we need religion and everything to teach us not to be bad, and morals and everything have to be taught to us. But we're not. We're the opposite, right? We're actually collaborative. We actually want to help each other and want to live in groups and want to actually nurture each other. And men and women both want to nurture each other. And so that's one of the big things, is that when you actually scan the brain, when you actually look at a person's brain, it becomes much more active when they're doing the wrong thing, when they're doing something immoral or unethical. Areas of the brain activate which are saying to us that they're actually having difficulty doing that immoral thing or that thing which isn't right. And when people do the right thing, much less of the brain, especially those areas in conflict, none of those areas light up, because that's what we actually do automatically. Is the right thing, is a good thing. And so I think that's one thing that we really need to think more about and teach everybody about, that we as a species actually are really nurturing and nice.
Altruistic.
Not altruistic by nature.
Yeah.
And we know that, right? You do something good, our brains actually release a whole bunch of really happy neurotransmitters because of the fact that you did something good to make us do things good in the future. That's how our brains are set up. So if you're doing positive things to help other people, it's extremely beneficial for both your cardiovascular system, which is good for your health, and for your brain, because your brain releases all these really important neurotransmitters which make you feel happy because you've actually helped someone else. And that's our true nature, and that's what we need to get back to, is actually that true nature, and start supporting everyone in doing that, doing it more.
Yeah, listening to you speak, I don't know how long ago this was, but I remember watching a documentary from the Max Planck Institute on human and child development, and they were demonstrating the whole collaborative, altruistic stuff. And there was a clip there with this 2.5-year-old standing next to mum who's hanging up clothes, and every now and then she would drop one of the pegs. Right, and the kid would look at the peg and look around, and mum's just keeps hanging up the clothes, and the kid bends over, picks up the peg, and hands it to mum.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was such a beautiful little vignette that showed exactly that sort of principle.
Yeah.
But again, when I think about some of my experiences, for example, at school, and what I hear from teenagers, that presumption that human beings, especially teenagers, are evil. And they will do things to spite adults, and that they need to be, brutishly socialised out of it, is still really, really prevalent.
It is.
And it's an undertone. It's not even necessarily completely explicit.
No. But it is taught, right? That is what is actually taught in schools. And but kids are taught that they go to school and they're taught that they have to be disciplined, that there has to be really strict rules around what they can and can't do, and they have to, line up in lines, and they have to be, sit in their specific spots, and they have, rather than nurturing them and going, hey, you guys are all going to do the right thing, so let's all do this together and let's all learn together and connect, because we know the connection between the teacher and the student is the number one thing that'll actually end up in learning, right? That's actually what we need, is teachers need to connect to the kids, and they do that by actually being vulnerable, right? And so the kids then see vulnerability and feel connected to the teacher, and then they're more likely to actually learn. And there's a huge amount of neuroscience research showing that that's what's necessary, just like a clinician. And so we need to change that attitude in schools around this idea that the teacher's the boss and the big thing with the stick, and all the kids are doing what they're told because they have to keep them in control. They have to herd them. They have to, because they don't, right? And the kids will actually do the right thing if you allow them to do the right thing.
Yeah. I think as an adult, demonstrating the behaviour that you want is probably one of the most fundamental things you can do for them.
Yes.
So how can we translate some of these insights into practical day-to-day tasks, behaviours, whatever you want to call them? I prefer not to call it a task. I'd like it just to be about relating.
We want it to be normal, right? We want this to be normal and
organic.
A normal part of it. Yeah, organic. So each of the chapters I go through a different tip on how to actually become more connected to the people around you. One of the things I do is I make sure that each day I'm having a coffee with someone I like. I just sit down and have a coffee with someone at a cafe somewhere. And it means that I am actually making that connection with someone that I like to actually interact with. And I'm lucky I've got, like yourself, a lot of people that I actually interact with on a regular basis. And I'm lucky enough to be collaborating with you, so we get together and chat. And we end up chatting probably more than we do work. But that's fantastic because it's a relationship that we've got, and we're supporting each other. And I think we just need to be doing more of that, a lot more of that, and that is better for our brain health than anything else we can actually do. So it's so important, and we need to be looking after our brain health, right? And I want to change that message. There's a lot of stuff in the media talking about mental health and mental health crises and all the rest of it, but I think when people think mental health, there's a lot of stereotypes and a lot of pushback when it comes to mental health, and so people don't think about it unless they're going through a crisis and they need someone like you to actually go and see. I would like people to think of brain health as something that we do every day. We keep our brain healthy every day, just like we keep our bodies. So physical health and brain health, two things everybody does, everybody talks about, everyone's happy to talk about it, and we actually do it to keep ourselves in both physical good condition and mentally good condition, so that we can all thrive. And we don't have the crises that we got at the moment in the mental health area if we were all doing that. And one of the things is connecting better with each other and slowing down. Just slow down. You don't need to be 100 miles an hour. We don't need to be, a lot of people wear this busy badge as a badge of honour, You see people and say, oh, how are you? Oh, I'm so busy. And it's like, well, are you really that busy?
Well, that's one question. But the other thing too is, have you thought about not being?
Yeah, not being busy.
Yeah. Because that idea of a badge of honour that we're all really, really, really busy, and then we get people who, are diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, and when you look at them, and people now talking about neurodiversity and all that sort of thing, a large part of it, I think, is a reflection of, one, the cultural context that they're in, and that they're over-aroused, they're hyper-aroused, and they can't really effectively manage all this stuff that's going on, and people are expecting them to do more and more and more. And I think it's, almost a survival reaction to just going, oh, stuff this, and I'll just do what's in front of me, like play computer games or so on. Which brings me to the next question. Well, not so much a question, but I'm really, really interested in your bugbear and mine about devices, technology.
Yeah, well, I mean, while you were saying that, I was thinking that, a lot of these people that are very busy will then be spending 2 or 3 hours on their phones, scrolling through TikTok and all the rest of it, right? I'm really, really busy, but I can spend 2 hours on my device just scrolling nonsense. And I think we need to be more aware of that. And that is one of the big problems, and why most people feel really busy but aren't productive, because in actual fact they're not busy, but they're spending a large amount of their time being distracted by their phones and being distracted by things on their computers and so on. And again, they're losing that 90 seconds every time that happens, which means they don't have the 24 hours that we all supposed to have each day, and so they can't get as much done, so therefore they feel as though they're not actually getting as much done because of that. So we need to do something about that. There's nothing social about social media. Social media is advertising. We know Trent Harris, who used to work for Facebook, has said that he came up with a little button, put it on Facebook, where you press the button on Facebook, and then a little ding would go out to everybody who is close by, who's one of your connections, and says, I'm close by, do you want to catch up for coffee, or I'm ready to do something. And supposedly, according to him, they took it off straight away, because they said, no, if we do that, then people will go out and connect with each other. People will be social if we do that, and we want them on the devices. We don't want them out actually being social, right? There's nothing social about these things. They're advertising. They're either advertising people, or they're advertising companies, or they're advertising other things. So we need to be aware of it. And I talk a lot at schools with, especially teenagers, around the whole social media and the fact that these smartphones are making us dumb, literally making us dumb. And around the fact that, like, I say to the teenagers, look, you're spending 3 hours a day on these devices, and they're not paying you anything for that, but they're making huge amounts of money out of that. These billionaires, they're now flying to Mars and doing all these ridiculous things because of the money they're making out of this. Would you, if I asked you to work for me for 3 hours a day for no money, right? Would you do it? And of course they all go, no, of course not. Why are you working for these tech companies for 3 or 4 hours a day? Why are you wasting your life so that these tech companies can make lots of money through their advertisements? And which is what's happening, right? And that's what we're doing. We're literally wasting our lives looking at our phones so that these guys over in Silicon Valley can make billions of dollars and fly around in their jets. And it makes no sense to me at all. And it is literally making us dumb. We know we are less intelligent today than we were 10 years ago because of these devices. More likely to have it's the diagnosis with ADHD if you get given a smartphone at a young age. The more you use a smartphone, the more likely you are to be diagnosed with ADHD. We know there's abnormal development of the white matter tracts in the brain, kids who are put on devices early on. So there's actually abnormal development of the brain because of these devices. And it goes on and on and on. Mental health issues go through the roof and so on. And it's easy. All you got to do is turn off all your notifications and you improve mental health within 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it?
It is.
And it brings me back to that whole thing that when we talk about now neurodiversity, the devices are part of the problem. They're not, they're often the cause of the problem. It's not a genetic thing. People are always trying to tell me that, whatever it is that they're going through is genetic and it's not, environmental. And most of the time I can demonstrate to them very clearly that you experience anxiety as a response to your environment. And that's both your inner environment but also the external one.
Yeah, and there's our DNA. There's been a big because we all of a sudden discovered the DNA, and then we started doing we were able to do more research on DNA. There was this big push to label everything as part of our DNA, part of what we're born with. But our DNA is very, very small. Our DNA is about 128 megabytes of data we get from our father and we get from our mother. It's bugger all, right? It's less than you get on those old thumb drives that you used to throw away after a week because they're always full. It's a really small amount of information. So the vast majority, even our visual system, is set up through experience, through the experiences we have in the womb, through the light and random fluctuations and everything, and that determines our lateral nucleus and then the striations that go in our visual cortex, which allow binocular vision. All that comes through experience, not through our DNA. It's not born. So all this other stuff, anxiety, depression, all these things are also through experience, not through our DNA. And we've got to get away from this idea of blaming our parents and start realising that it's experiences that we have that determine all of these things that happen to us, and very little of it. There are some genetic components to it, but very few compared to what we actually think.
So, in the doctrine of psychiatry and medicine, you and I guess, are heretics.
Yeah, and I think there isn't the evidence there for it, right? But of course, we want to blame the genetics, because if we blame the genetics, then we need drugs to cure it. But if we blame behaviour, if we blame experience, then we can change it through experience and behaviour. And so, of course, the drug companies are going to want to blame genetics, because then if they go, there's a genetic component to this, even though it's tiny, even though it's only, demonstrates less than 2% of the variance or 5% of the variance, there is a genetic component, then we're going to have to find a drug to cure it, right? And it's like, well, what about the other 95% of the variance, right? That's all behaviour. Yeah. So if we change behaviour, we could actually cure that as well, and do it a lot more easily and a lot cheaper.
The other flow on from that too, in my experience, is that, if we keep it genetic, it means fundamentally that I'm really not an agent in this. It's being done to me. Like my system has conspired against me. So the whole notion of responsibility and accountability now is on really shaky ground. Whereas if we're talking about, okay, this is in, like environment and your behaviour, and you can change that, that ups the stakes in terms of agency, responsibility, and accountability.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. Agree completely.
So what are your thoughts now that it's taken so long to ban phones from schools?
It's great. We've done it here in Australia, and they're just announced that they're going to do it in New Zealand, which is also awesome. So how they implement this into the schools is, of course, also really important. So I know some schools, they're going very strict on it, and they're going to teach the students why they're doing this and what the benefits to it are, and so on. And that's really, really important. I know other schools are just like, all right, we'll just tell them to turn off their phones and leave them in their bags, which means that a lot of these kids are just going to go around the back of the shed or whatever and open up. And also, just having the phone in your bag still means your attention's on the bag, on the phone, because it's there, right? We know that if you're driving a car and you turn off your phone, you put it in the glove box, 10% of your attention is still on your phone. If you have a phone in your bag when you're trying to learn, 10% of your attention is still on your phone, and there's still a significant impact on working memory and on your intelligence. So it's going to really depend on how the schools implement it, but I think it's a really good thing. I think a lot of kids are going to really benefit from this. All the schools that I've worked with up until now, once they've implemented bans and they've done it well, you're going to the school 6 months later, the principals are really happy because the students are getting better marks, but also the kids are out there playing, right? They're actually playing cricket together, they're playing football together, they're socialising with each other, they're chatting. Whereas you go into a school where they've got the phones, at lunchtime they're all just sitting there looking at their phones, they're not doing anything, they're not exercising. All those are really important things that kids and teens should be doing. Yeah. So it's awesome that they're doing it, and it's great that they're going to do it in New Zealand, but hopefully principals will get on board and implement it properly so that it actually makes a significant change in these schools. But But I mean, China's now gone really strict on the devices over there. They've made it teenagers are only allowed to use a phone for 2 hours a day, I think it is.
Right, okay.
Otherwise, the parents get fined, and then kids are not allowed to have them until they become teenagers.
Yeah.
And otherwise, again, the parents get fined. So they've gone hardcore because they've seen the implications of it. And being a communist country, they're paying for the effects of it, right? And they don't want to pay for the effects of it. Whereas, in other countries, they're not going. I was on the BBC radio the other day, and unfortunately, the UK doesn't seem to be going down the same route yet. Hopefully, they change their minds, and hopefully, other countries.
Yeah, I had a look, and I couldn't see anything in the UK that resembles anything like what we're doing.
No.
A point around that, have we got the data yet to show an improvement in actual behaviour?
Yes.
Like aggression, violence, anything?
No, but in Spain's been fantastic. Well, Spain's been fantastic from an experimental point of view, because in Spain, several provinces in Spain have banned the smartphone from all their schools. Other provinces have not. So you've got this almost designed experiment going on in Spain where you can look across schools, and in those provinces you've got both private schools and public schools, and in those provinces you've got low SES areas and high SES areas, so poor areas and wealthy areas. So you can look at all the different interactions and so on. And it's really interesting that they show cyberbullying has gone down significantly in the provinces where they've banned the phones. Normal bullying has gone down as well. So not just cyberbullying, but also face-to-face bullying has gone down in those schools. The mental health has improved in those schools, and educational outcomes are all improved in those schools where in those provinces where they've actually banned the phone. So it's a really nice demonstration of the positive effects that we get, both in behaviour, in mental health, and in how they actually treat the kids treat each other, which is really fantastic.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
So we're on the right trajectory with this, because I mean the things that people are talking about is how do we stop bullying?
Yeah.
And I mean if we are able to show them really concrete evidence that managing devices is a big part as an effective strategy in reducing that, then we more than likely are going to get some inroads in that.
Yeah, that's a great study where it really does demonstrate it very, very conclusively.
I just had this thought, this brain snap. I wonder how this plays out within couples' relationships.
Oh, yeah. I think very, very badly for any couple. I mean, I know you're not doing couples relationships anymore, but I can't imagine having a relationship with someone who is on their device all the time. I mean, how do you do that? Yeah. But I mean, there's surveys showing that 10% of people will check text and check their phone while they're having sex. I mean, that's just insane, right? Can you imagine a situation where you are and the other person went, hang on, and my phone just beeped?
So the next time a guy comes in to see me with erectile dysfunction, rather than going straight to anxiety as a problem, are you checking your phone, dude?
Or is your partner checking her phone? I mean, that would be
very demoralising.
Yes.
It is interesting because all of this topic is wrapped up with a large part of my work, which is about making good men great, and part of that is how do we get men to really engage much more significantly and be able to establish well-regulated, intimate, emotional relationships and social relationships, not just with their partner, but with their friends.
With everybody, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think there is a deep connection with that. And I think we're coming back down to, in some respects, some of the, the work that you and I are doing together about, our next work together, which is the Great Man Con, which is basically
which is coming along.
how men have got sucked into an ideology that's so destructive on every level. That patriarchy is actually not about connection. It's about dominance and control.
Yeah, it's the opposite.
Right?
No.
So we've got fundamentally, both as neuroscientists but also psychotherapists and psychologists, a massive task ahead to get society to understand the interconnection of this.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, you know, throwing more money at the mental health arena isn't necessarily going to change.
No.
Isn't going to get us the return on investment.
No, I mean, I have a very good friend who's a architect, and he just talked to me recently about the fact that it's really sad when he goes onto building sites, because if he goes onto the building site during the lunch period or during morning tea, they're all on their devices, right? They're all looking at their devices while they're on thing. And he said in the old days they'd all be laughing at each other and we'd all be having jokes and everyone would be having a great, you know, and you'd have the apprentices, or, you know, the older blokes would be having a go at the apprentices and all the rest of it. And he said none of that. They're quiet. They used to be fun. They used to be loud. Everyone used to, you know, interact and learn from each other during those periods. And a lot of people would be reading the paper and then talking about things that were in the paper and everything. None of that. He said it's quiet. Everyone's sitting there by themselves, looking at their device for however long they've got a break for, and then they go back to work. And so, I mean, that is sad, right? These kids, the teens who are the apprentices and the people who are working on the building site aren't having those relationships anymore with the people around them. And it's all the way through, right? I did a podcast called The Water Cooler the other day, which... He started that because he realised people don't stand around in water coolers and chat to each other anymore. So he started a podcast around discussions that you would normally have around a water cooler. I mean, how pathetic is that? That you need a podcast because people... And again, when I work with organisations, they're like, how do we get people to collaborate? Because people don't collaborate anymore. I'm like, well, get them to put their frigging phones away and actually talk to each other when they're standing at the lift, when they're waiting in a meeting. People walk into a meeting, and if it hasn't started, they'll pull out their phone and start reading their phone rather than talking to the other people in the meeting room, which is what we used to do. And that's when you would find out what other people do, and then you start talking about collaborations, or I can help with that because I've got or hey, I've got this problem, can you, or do you know, all that stuff, right? None of that happens anymore because everyone's looking at their phone in between. Whenever there is any downtime, we used to communicate with each other. We don't. We now look at advertisements on the smartphones, which is crazy.
A small percentage of people richer.
Yeah, a very small percentage of people richer.
That concept is actually highly irritating, but also potentially useful.
Yeah, and it is really, really irritating, right? These people shouldn't have the money. I recently... on social media, I recently saw a post which said, you know, nobody should have more than $1 billion, and if anybody gets to the value of just under, you know, a dollar under $1 billion, every other cent that they earn from then on should be given to charity, and they should get a gold plaque they can put up on their in their home saying, I made $1 billion. That should be it, right? Once you get to $1 billion, that's it.
Jackpot.
You don't need any more after that. Because that's a ridiculous amount of money. And then everything else you earn should go to actually helping other people. Because none of us got here because of the fact that we did everything, right? Everything we've got is actually because of everybody, because everybody's been collaborating. You know, this amazing technology we're using here to create this podcast, right? All the metals, all of the silicon and all of the bits and pieces and everything come from all over the world and comes from us collaborating over thousands and thousands of years to get to the point where we now got this amazing technology, and then it's all built from bits that come from all over the world, from everyone. And we need to get back to realising that that's what's important. Everyone's contributing and everyone deserves to have
a
piece of the
share.
pie. Not these ridiculous things where we've currently got the 1%ers. But that's insane. Sorry, I'm still going on.
No, that's fine. No, that's good. I love it. That's soapbox. My rant. See, the difference that I've got with that is that they shouldn't be putting it into charity. They should be paying their equivalent share of taxes, which is part of a democratic system. The problem with that whole let's involve everybody in the collective pie because we collaborate, it flies in the face of what the neoliberal economists tell us, which are these self-made billionaires.
There's nothing self-made about them.
I know, but it's another part of the con.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah, it is. It's a big part of the con because they're not self-made. They're made on the backs of thousands of people who are working really bloody hard to get there. I mean, you can think of a particular individual who's pays his workers bugger all, and they're the ones who are doing all the work so that he can make a rocket that looks like a penis so that he can go into outer space. I mean, how ridiculously insane
How
is
Freudian.
that? Yeah, how Freudian is that? And so we've got to realise that there is no such thing as a self-made millionaire. They've made it on the back of thousands and thousands of workers who are working really hard to get to the point where this person's got this ridiculous... Or they've inherited it, right? The vast majority of them actually inherit it. And inherited it from pasts which are pretty evil, right? A lot of it's through slavery and through all these dodgy trades, corruption, all sorts of dodgy things. So they've either inherited it or they've earned it through using the rest of us to get to that point, which is just as bad. And I was talking to someone, I think we were chatting about it as well recently, that in the past, when we've got to this point where you've had these 1%ers who are doing ridiculous things with these huge sums of money, we've had revolutions where we've actually gone and either hung them or chopped their heads off. And you can think back to how many times that's happened in the past where we've got to this ridiculous spot and then we've all got up and said, no, this is no good, let's get rid of them and let's redistribute that wealth. Unfortunately, we're more civilised now, and that's not going to happen. So we've got to do it some other way. But there has to be another way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, whether we're more civilised or not, I think we're more sedated.
Maybe sedated. Maybe seted's a better.
You know.
Yeah, we're now on our devices and we're all too busy, supposedly too busy, to think about the fact that we're being treated like fools.
Yeah. Mark, we can continue to have this conversation ad infinitum.
We can.
And we will pick up on another episode on this to explore even more deeply. So, mate, let me thank you very much.
Thank you for having me along.
Oh, mate, it's a pleasure. You always bring heaps of stuff to the table that gives me endless food for thought. And so it's just such a joy to have you on board, with the podcast. And, if you're happy to do regular segments in this, I'd love it.
Oh, yeah, I'd be more than happy to. Love to. I think it's a great... We were obviously... Well, as we know, we're writing a book together, so we're definitely on the same page when it comes to this. But there's a lot to say.
All right, so dear listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this particular episode, our 200th episode of Inspired Change with Gunter. As you just heard, Mark and I are planning on lots more work together. There's also a podcast coming up which follows along the lines of conversations with my wife, and there's already been a couple of those. So let's think about things that are important to us, like connection, like being attached to each other in a healthy way, in where we can create collaborative, cooperative relationships that not just run in a family, but run in the community, and then, the broader sense, schools, an attachment centre. Wouldn't that be a fantastic thought?
Yes.
So until next time, this is me signing off. Please push that button for subscribe. Have a look around at the other stuff that I'm doing on the internet. And until next time, this is me signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda at noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at noirtainment.com.